Well, my name is Amy Martin, and I'm really so happy I got asked to be part of this. I had no idea how much I needed this night until I heard Raphael's first few sentences, and I was like, oh, because I think that I have been living in these questions ever since I started living as an artist, and I'm really in the thick of them. I just want to throw out a few questions, and then I want to talk a little bit just about my own journey, and then try and hook it back up with the bigger issues. I felt like Raphael pointed out the whole question of art as a moral act, and if it's moral, what is it? What is the guiding morality? What are we moral to? What are we loyal to? I feel like that's a huge question, and that we're all still grappling with, even though we like to pretend in our modern culture that it's not. And I think in addition to, or maybe the predecessor of religion and the state, I feel like the big missing hole in how we're thinking about that now is the corporation or the dollar, which is claims so much of our lives and so much of our artistic and creative attention. I had a workshop this summer where I learned some singing in the African American tradition, including roots in Africa itself, and out of that I came out with the question of how did art ever get separated from the duty and the responsibility that Raphael was talking about and that Katie was demonstrating in all this great work? How did we ever sever those things, and why is it so hard to knit them back together now? When they cultures all over the world, it's natural, it's normal. Art is supposed to relate and be part of and be responsible to society. I have a feeling probably a lot of you maybe know the answer to that question, but I don't, and I can't. I'm puzzled, continually puzzled. I feel like a question that looms really large for me personally, both in terms of what I'm actually trying to do and also how maybe I need to be able to speak about or explain to people about what I'm trying to do, is how do we make art that does have a morality or loyalties in it that isn't perceived as art that is just propaganda? Or how do we become artists that are trying to have that sense of responsibility and not be just perceived as somebody's lackey, because we're so used to that. We're so used to everybody working for somebody and everybody pushing an agenda. And there's been a lot of really crappy art made that is propaganda. I mean, the straight up like propaganda from the state to, I'm loving it, or whatever the current McDonald's thing. You know what I mean? And so people have reason to be suspicious. But I think the problem is that we're so used to that we almost can't see something now that does have a morality and loyalty to it without immediately thinking like somebody's just trying to promote their little, private agenda. And it's like we don't even know how to think about art that, like the demonstrations that Katie gave. But I do think the art itself, in a way, transcends that problem. And then, last question before I kind of launch into a little bit of my personal stuff is, how do we actually get art that has a loyalty and morality to it done? How do we actually do it and survive as artists? I mean, I think it's really hard to figure out how to survive as an artist anyway. I mean, if you just want to, in my field, I'm a musician, if you want to be a big superstar musician, that's like a hard enough nut to crack, but there's sort of a path laid out for you to some extent, or at least there used to be before Napster. But if you are trying to be an artist and that's not what you want, but you know that you want to be an artist, it's a little bit of a wilderness. And particularly, how do we do it not just as individuals, but how do we do it together in a way that is, has a chance to actually impact the culture at a broader level and push us to be the best artists we can be. So I'm not an academic, and so I am going to kind of do a little bit more of personal stuff maybe than than the other two speakers, but hopefully it will have some relevance to you too. I think that last question is one that I'm just continually flummoxed by and grappling with, and it's really actually kind of a relief to feel it crystallize even just here tonight of like, oh yeah, that's my question, and it's okay to have that question and not know the answer. I think the very first song that I ever wrote, I was living in Ecuador for the summer. I was taking an intensive Spanish language and culture course over the course of 9 weeks when I was in college. And I had gotten a guitar for Christmas that was very old and crappy, and I knew like 4 chords on it, but I took it with me to Ecuador because I just loved it so much, and I loved playing, and I just felt like I was going to need it, and I did, and I played all the time, and I developed, I gained a lot while I was there just by desperately needing to play it all the time. And there was a time I was walking home from my class, and I'm this, Iowa farm girl out in Ecuador and feeling pretty excited about life, and I must have been 19, and I had, of course, my shoes were fine and my clothes were fine, and I was getting to be there, and I'd worked for 3 summers beforehand earning money so I could be there, and I really was appreciating every day of it, and this woman and I'd seen plenty of other people like this while I was there, but it just somehow stopped me in my tracks. There was a woman who was walking down the street towards me, and we brushed arms as we went by, and I was watching her, and she couldn't have been older than me. She might have been younger than me, and she was walking like this because she had a huge stack of wood on her back, and she was wearing traditional Ecuadorian native clothes, which were gorgeous, and she looked like she maybe had 20 years left in her life, just from the way her face looked and the way her body looked, even though I could tell that she was young. And I just didn't know what to do with that moment of awareness of like, I'm a college kid from the United States in Ecuador, and you have every right that I have to an education, to being able to learn and explore and do anything you want to do and eat all the food that you could possibly eat, and all of that, but you are living this way and I am living this way, and how does this make sense? And so I went back to my home stay where I was living and wrote a song, and it was frankly a pretty bad song, but it was really passionate, and it was so important to me because I needed art in that moment to make sense out of what was going on. Or if not to make sense out of it, at least to somehow have a vehicle for digesting it. And then I came back and I did my little talks at like the Rotary Club and at my grandma's, reading book or book circle. And I always sang that song because it was my way of communicating the complexity of this moment. I don't necessarily think it did a great job, but I was trying. And I guess I'm telling that story because I think it is still so natural to us as human beings. Just because our culture doesn't say that art is supposed to question and connect us to societal issues, I just think it's so natural to so many of us that that's what we need it for. And I wrote those kinds of songs, and I wrote the heartbreaky, I'm in love with my boyfriend songs, and I wrote about my cats and all kinds of crazy stuff. And to me, it was just all my songs. And then when I came and started playing music out in the world for people, more than just my family and Grandma's book club, people were saying things in like, nice reporters and people that would come to shows to try and give me a little bit of press would say things like, so tell me about your political work, and tell me about what it's like to be a political musician. And then, okay, so now I'm answering that question, and so then somebody's like, oh, she's a political musician, so let's have her come play at this rally, which I was great with. I was like, awesome, let's get more music and rallies. And but this thing started happening where I started to develop an identity as a political artist, and I fought it, and there's a part of me that still does fight it because I'm like, I still feel, even though all the evidence is pointing in a different direction, I still feel like that's just an artist. Like, it doesn't have to have a subset. And And I feel like, you know, it's a little bit the same thing with the woman artist. You know what I mean? Like, why do we have to put these labels on ahead of time? I mean, I don't think it's ever coming at me with like, or very rarely coming at me with like a bad intention, but it just, what makes me want to fight is that there's something in me that feels like it doesn't fit. It just doesn't feel like it tells enough of the story, because I still can sense the Aboriginal artist in me that's like, that's just what we do. That's what we do as artists. And so I want to define, I want everyone else to redefine their definition rather than me having to adjust. I guess I wanted just to talk a little bit too about that question of how do we do this and survive, because I think I felt, you know, all along that there's and I still feel like there's something in my calling that has to do with this very issue of art as civic engagement. And I've tried to manifest it in different ways, in songs themselves, like the one I just told you about, and plenty of other ones too. And also just in the process of making art. I made a CD, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. I was so disturbed by the stories of what was happening in Afghanistan with the Taliban. And I'm disturbed all over again. But it was fresh news to me at that point, and I just kind of couldn't get it out of my mind. And I was just feeling, you know, that sense of responsibility of like, I have all this entitled power. I have enough to eat. I'm a woman who has gotten to have an education. And here are all these women in this country that are just suffering, and like, we've got to do something, right? And I want to make songs, and I want to make music, and I didn't want to make an album of music that was all about the Taliban, because I didn't know that much about it. And you're always supposed to write what you know, and I'd never been there, and I wasn't going to get to go anytime soon, and I felt like it would be bad. It would not be good art. And I had all of these other songs I wanted to put out, and so I was like, okay, I'm concerned about this issue. I had one song about that whole situation. Is there some way that I can get some art out, get some art made, do something that makes some sort of statement or raises some awareness about this situation, and maybe even raises some money about it? So I just threw it out there on email. Does anybody want to contribute to me making a CD? And in exchange for your contribution, I'm going to give away every dime that comes back from the CD to these 2 women's groups in Afghanistan that I'd researched and made some connections with. And I think I can do it for, I think it was like $5,000. Anybody interested? And people contributed. And then at the last hour, I was like $1,000 short, and I didn't know if I could keep my recording dates. And then I went to my mailbox, and somebody had sent me a $1,000 check. So it was like a whole bunch of people that had gave like $10 or $20, and then this one person who gave $1,000, who was amazing. And then I gave all the money. I had a goal of raising $10,000 from the CD, and I gave all that money away. And I was thinking as I was doing this, like, this is really weird, because I would be at a show performing, and I was really glad I'd made the CD and everything, but then I needed like gas money to get to the next show, and people would be buying the CDs, and I'd be like thinking, wow, if people only buy that CD, I actually can't get to my next venue. But if they buy this other one, then I can. And I guess I'm only bringing up these nitty-gritty kind of ugly details because I think it's kind of what it comes down to for artists, is it's like, I did this thing I was proud of. I think I'm still glad I did it. I don't know if it was perfectly well thought out. Clearly it wasn't perfectly well thought out. But it was an attempt, you know, it was an attempt to try and connect this desire to make art with this desire to make a difference, and without the art becoming propaganda, and but it left me in a weird spot, and it just personally and financially, and it left me still with the question of like, okay, so now I did that, now I still want to make more music, how do I do it? And I've done other projects too, but I'll just mention one more and wrap it up. And not last year, the year before, I was talking to Schwan, who runs the Biomimicry Institute, which is a great organization here in Missoula. And for purposes of tonight, I'll just say it's an environmental organization. And she was telling me about all the amazing things they did, and she said, we've really got to find a way to get some of the concepts of biomimicry out into the culture more broadly, and especially with children. And I was so turned on by all these different ideas, and I said off the cuff, I could make a CD about that. And then I went out for a run, and I was running and writing songs in the Rattlesnake and completely blissing out and feeling like, oh, not only could I'm going to, and we're going to start now. And so I marched back up to Bryony's office all sweaty like a half an hour later, and I was like, let's do this. And she amazingly said yes and made it happen and got the funding. And I was a little smarter this time. I was like, this is what I need to do my part, and you can do this other part, and I don't need to own the CD. You guys can do what you need to do with the CD, use it to raise money in your own way. And it's turned into this really the coolest collaboration I've ever had, where I ended up starting a kids choir that's now ongoing, and I completely love them, the Missoula Coyote Choir, and we decided that we weren't just going to make a CD, we were going to be involved in the whole process of trying to get the biomimicry concepts out, and we did a tour of elementary schools around Missoula and talked about it, and now every year as we go on, we choose another service project for the year. And so I'm trying to teach these kids and through them learn myself how to think about art and civic engagement as the same thing from the get-go. And it just reinforces my gut feeling that this is natural. This is natural part of being a human being, because these kids don't need to be told like theories of, why you should try and use art to be responsible in society. They're just like, we love to sing. We care about penguins. What are we going to do? You know what I mean? And it's like, it's so natural, and it's so inspiring. I'm learning from them all the time, but I am still left with these questions, and at the same time, I'm continually inspired, because even though it's not maybe the officially sanctioned or recognized inside the box version of music or art that's out there, or theater, or literature, anything, it's so happening, as Katie demonstrated. It's happening all the time, and it seems to me like we're really ripe for one of those paradigm shifts where we go from thinking that this thing that's on the margins that we sort of pay attention to, we can return it to the center, and it isn't. I don't think that it doesn't exclude anything. It's not like, oh, if you're going to make art that is trying to be concerned with global warming, that you can't also write a song about, the night you had last night partying at the Union Club. Like, you can do all those things, and I don't think we have to separate them in the other direction either, which is sometimes maybe what happens. It's like, I am not going to write one love song, or I refuse to talk about it, have any kind of confessional personal expression in my art, because that's what those passe other people do, and I just think it's silly on both sides, and I think that there are ways to knit it all together, but I am still confused about how. And I guess I just want to leave with this question that I think about so often is, what if all of this amazing creative power that we have as human beings, I mean, it's really our special gift. We're not that fast, and we don't have very sharp claws. We can't hold our breath underwater for, hours, anything cool like that. All that we've got is this creative power. We are generators of ideas and new concepts and stuff and beauty. And what if all of that, or let's not even go for that, what if 20% of that was attached to and harnessed to some common goals again? And maybe we needed to swing this far away from the church and the state to get back to something that's a little bit more, that feels more authentic and maybe more diverse. Maybe, the question is that we all know now, or I think a lot of us know now, that we don't need to just only make art to celebrate a Christian God. And we don't only need to make art to celebrate, like, the Soviet Union or something, or the United States. But maybe it's loyalties that we need, and not just a loyalty. But what if just a fraction of our creative power was going towards that? All of the people who spend time figuring out how to make styrofoam better and cheaper, all of the people who are right now designing the coolest, fastest, sexiest bomb. You know, all of us who are struggling every day just to survive and ending up in our circumstances where we end them up. Nobody wakes up when they're 10 years old and is like, I want to be part of the system that really oppresses people, you know? But it's where we end up. It's where, because that's where the opportunities lie, and people need to survive. And so what if there was something that happened in our system, and I don't know what and how to get there, where those same people with all that genius could be using it to help solve world hunger, could be using it to preserve endangered species, could be using it to think about global warming in new ways. I just think all of these societal discussions and conversations that we have are so often so dry and so unoriginal and so like program, yeah, budget, blah, blah, blah. And nobody listens because it's boring. And it also feels dead. And I think the reason why it does feel boring and dead is because there's no art in it and there's no artists in it. So that's my hope. Thanks.